Ontario's Liberal government is making moves to cap salaries of the highest earners in the province's public sector. Joining us now to detail what the proposed legislation might deliver to the province and its employees is Bill Walker, Progressive Conservative MPP for the riding of Bruce Grey, Owen Sound, Catherine Fife, NDP MPP for the riding of Kitchener-Waterloo and her party's finance critic, and Martin Regcon, Ontario politics columnist at the Toronto Star. Welcome to all three of you. Thank you for being here. Before we start, I just want to say that we did ask the Liberals to have someone join us around the table, but they were unable to provide us with someone. Okay, my two MPPs, just sit tight for a minute because I want to talk to Martin for a bit. So Martin, here's the proposal. The province wants to cap executive salaries at certain agencies, LCBO, TVO, Orange, and eHealth. What does it mean?
Did you say TVO as well?
I did say TVO, yes.
Okay, good. So
I'm supposed to say that, right?
So this is emanated about a year or two ago. I think originally the NDP was pushing for this back in the day when they had influence, when there was a minority legislature, and they were able to use the balance of power to push this onto the public agenda. And they focused first on the health sector, because it makes sense to not have hospital CEOs getting massive amounts of money. The government has pushed this further and expanded it to the broader to the government and to its key agencies. So the LCBO, Orange, you may remember Orange, eHealth, you may remember eHealth. All the troublemakers are all now included in the amendments that the government is going to include with this.
Let's not say TVO is a troublemaker.
Except TVO. And so what they're doing is putting in essentially a hard cap on the executives, not just the big cheeses, but also the medium cheeses and the smaller ones as well. Anyone over $100,000 who is in a non-union supervisory or executive function will be covered by this. But two questions. One, why has it taken this long for the government to come up with a plan, a coherent and logical plan for how to factor in compensation, how to compare it to the public sector? And the second thing is, the devil is very much in the details. This bill is really almost a chapter heading. We have to figure out how they're going to figure out what is a fair compensation for someone in an executive position. The NDP came up with this kind of ballpark number, which was nice. I liked it, saying double the premier's salary is the maximum. But that doesn't work for every sector.
Which puts us about $420,000.
Roughly, yes. But does that really work for OPG, which runs all of our nuclear reactors? Can we keep somebody at that salary at $420,000, for example? So they're going to do it on a sector-by-sector basis, and as I say, the devil's in the details.
Okay, you make the point that, you know, when it was a minority situation, okay, the Liberals had to consider this. They're not in that situation anymore. Why does the government want to do that?
Well, for one thing, they're short of money, so they really do have to worry about the dollars and cents coming out. In reality, this is not going to fix the deficit problem. You know, if you look at the health sector, for example, if you someone once did the math, if you look at all the CEOs of hospitals, of which there are about 150, maybe 180, I think it is, and you cap them at $420,000 from what they are now, you would save about $4 million maybe on a budget of about $48 billion a year. So you're talking small amounts of money. So a lot of it is symbolism, but I think powerful symbolism. It doesn't make sense when hospitals are out there fundraising or short of money or closing wards to have people getting big fat cat salaries. So that's why it resonated at that level.
Okay,
I think the symbolism, though, and the values are something that the government is conscious of, even though they are now in a majority.
We will talk about the symbolism a little later on, but there are some notable exclusions already. Pan Am Games aren't included in this proposal.
Potential troublemakers as well. I think Pan Am is first of all, it's already late in the game. This legislation probably won't take effect for several months down the road. They've got to figure out the comparators, the metrics, and all that stuff. They bring in compensation experts, and it's all gobbledygook. Pan Am also has very special bonus arrangements. They get big whopping salary bonuses if they complete the stuff on time. So I'm not sure Pan Am would have been the ideal place to use it for.
Okay, let's bring in our MPPs. You want to respond to anything that Martin said, Catherine?
Of course I do. So Martin is incorrect on one of the things. Actually a couple of things, but the bill itself does not have a hard cap here. It actually it's setting a framework to potentially bring in a regulation to do some information gathering, to down the line perhaps work into a framework because there's no hard cap in this legislation. So they're starting from a very watery place, and it is very symbolic, and that's really all that it is. And so when we brought in Bill 136, our leader Andrea Horwath brought it last session, we think that setting the cap at twice what the Premier makes is reasonable. And the people of this province have seen waste after waste. They've seen exorbitant severances. They've seen exorbitant salaries, and they have every right to not be patient or understanding or compliant in that. And so what we proposed is start at the 418, which is twice what the Premier makes, and then have every ministry make the case for an increase, perhaps. I mean, that's where those discussions are going to happen in the committee. And as for the NDP having influence in the last session versus now, versus a majority, I mean, we did try to hold the Liberals' feet to the fire during the budget sessions, and of course they reneged on several promises. So you can have influence, but making the Liberal government do what they say they're going to do in the first place is very, very difficult.
Okay. Bill, what do you want to say?
Well, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about what Martin said. I mean, the reality of all of this is that it's a very small piece of the pie. At the end of the day, there's a lot of things that the Liberals have done poorly. They've mismanaged most of our economy. They've got the debt at a level that's unprecedented. You know, I'm critic now of community and social services. We spend less in that whole ministry than we do on our debt payments. So at the end of the day, good first step. But you know what? They could have done this. They're responsible for most of this. Chris Mazza had a $9.3 million salary under Orange. They did that. It was the lack of oversight by that minister, and still did nothing to really do anything to correct that course, other than changing some deck chairs around the table. So I think at the end of the day, you know, we can look at the compensation of just the exact. We campaigned twice across the board for anybody getting their paycheck. We're in dire straits from the economic side of things. We need everyone to be able to look at and be realistic and say, look, we're spending way more than we bring in. Everybody's got to step back a little bit, not just the CEO, not just the top level. And again, there's no detail in this, which is half of when I've been here 3 years. The Liberals continually trot things out, and they do the cut line, and that's all you get is detail. So where is it? What is the hard cap? When's it going to happen? What happens if one of those organizations again go down? Our hospitals are taking major cuts right now. Does that CEO then go down even further in payment? I mean, if you mismanage something, that's another area that they haven't even looked at.
Okay, so not a lot of meat on the bones at this point, but let's talk about the sort of common argument against imposing any sort of restriction on wages, and that is that you don't attract the best and the brightest, that they will choose to work in the private sector where they can be compensated to a level which they think is acceptable. I want to get all of you in on this. Catherine, why don't you start me off?
So that's why our private members bill, Bill 136, actually built in a caveat. So, you know, if you're a nuclear physicist, if you're the CEO of a nuclear institution, and that is a skill set that warrants an additional, you know, salary upgrade, then fine. So, but you have to have a starting place. You have to, otherwise, you know, you're
But the starting place is sort of just fake. Like if you say, okay, well, it's 418, so. But you can go up to that. You can negotiate that if you're a nuclear physicist.
Well, I don't think so. I think you have to have a place to start to negotiate from, because you know the broader public sector. I mean, we are seeing salaries as high as $1.7 million in the public sector, versus, you know, on the lower scale, the frontline workers that the Conservatives think everybody should be frozen. Personal support workers are only making $12 to $14 an hour. You cannot apply the same scale and scope to all public sector. We're talking primarily about a burgeoning middle management and high bureaucrats like CEOs and executives. And you have to have a hard cap in order to negotiate a hard cap.
Well, let me come to you. Are we going to lose our best and brightest by putting on these kind of caps?
Well, I think certainly you run the risk of doing that. You know, people will go where the money is. But I think at the end of the day, we've said this very consistently, you have to live within a budget. You have to, the taxpayer pays the bill here. And at times you've got to live.
But the taxpayer also probably wants the best and the brightest.
Well, you do want the best, but you have to be able to afford the best. And again, right now, the Liberals have doubled our debt. We've got that staring us in the face every day. So, you know, to Catherine's point, if someone wants $1.7 million, we may not be able to afford $1.7 million.
Okay, in the good times, should we then not have salary caps? I mean, if we're not running a deficit?
Absolutely. I think what we should be doing is reviewing all of these agencies. We, again, have called for a program review of everything. What is the cost? What we really like to do, to be honest, is to get the detail out of most of these things. Catherine and I were talking before the show started. The Liberals brought out the Transparency and Accountability Act and time allocated it. I mean, how hypocritical is that? We've tried to bring Laura Miller and Peter Feist from the gas plant scandal, $1 billion loss, and we can't get that. So we have to be looking at things in the broadest scale we possibly can and really get to the root of the issues. And you know, the salary cap is a small sliver, I think, from Martin's perspective. I agree with that. And we need to be looking at everything and getting our province back in shape. And that's going to make some decisions that have to be done at this time.
Small sliver, but powerful symbolism. And people forget that Chris Mazza not only earned about $1.4 million a year plus bonuses, plus a smoothie every day at 3 o'clock. And I'd like to see that in the legislation, please, when they get down to the details. But a smoothie cap, a hard cap on the smoothies, perhaps. But look, the question of what's the right amount is a good one. And I think while I have to confess in my moments of weakness, I was attracted to the NDP's idea of a double the premier. The problem with that is that a lot of the lower paid salary hospitals in smaller communities might also tend to move up towards that cap. The cap becomes the floor. So what's useful about this legislation or this proposal is the idea to do some serious comparators, to look not just at the private sector, which is kind of the reflex, well, they're getting this much in the private sector, but look also at other public sector comparisons in other jurisdictions. It's not useful to compare a hospital administrator to somebody who works at a bank, or to say that so-and-so has to be paid this amount of money, or the best and the brightest, which is a phrase, I remind you, that was used ironically in the 1960s. They thought they were the best and the brightest, but they were a bit precocious. Look, people are always going to be poached, but I think the chances of somebody at a small or medium-sized hospital being poached by some big facility in Dubai or in Texas is something we're just going to have to live with. There are a lot of public service-minded people who would be happy to work at a cancer center or a hospital at less than $420,000 or less than $700,000 or even $1 million a year, as some of our hospital executives are paid. Look, I asked someone at one of the other ministries which are more poachable about how they deal with it, because there are people in the finance ministry, for example, who are prone to poaching, or at OPG, the nuclear geniuses and so on. And you know what? Sometimes you just have to run that risk, and you can't keep them there for an entire career. And maybe you will have higher staff turnover in some of these more intricate ministries. And maybe you have to reward them and give them higher promotions and bigger, more interesting, challenging opportunities. But we can't always compete with some of these private sector compensation committees who think people are worth $1 million. They aren't always.
Well, I also think it raises the point that this is all about money, that people only go to jobs for money, and I think that's something that we all make individual and choices with our families on.
I completely reject that premise. I mean, I also reject the idea that money buys you quality. I mean, the CEO of the Pan Am Games had cost overruns, projects were behind, the overall scope of the work was in question, and he was making $480,000 a year, a great job by all accounts, and then he was rewarded for doing a bad job by getting a $532,000 severance. And people have no patience for that, and nor should they. But let me be very clear. This piece of legislation will not rectify that wrong on the parts of the people of this province.
Okay, let's just stick with that for a minute, because I think, well, you two are definitely making this point, that this whole exercise, the fact that there's wiggle room, that it sort of negates this idea of even trying to go down this road. I mean, should the Liberals have just said, nah, we're not even going to touch this one?
No, I think it's a good idea. I think, we've said already, they have to go beyond chapter headings to the details. I frankly wonder what they've been doing for the last few decades. If they haven't done this kind of hard work of doing the comparators and so on, what on earth are they using as the basis for paying people today? One of the questions I have about this legislation is they're not just going for the people who are earning $400,000 or $1 million. They're going for anybody above $100,000. So I don't know how broadly they're going to cast the net. This is for supervisory staff or executive staff is the phrasing that they use. But I think we all tend to focus on the CEO, the big cheese. The medium cheeses also can make a lot of money at some of these bigger organizations. And so the vice president at certain of the hospitals in downtown Toronto make also hundreds of thousands of dollars. So they're also going to be captured in this legislation, and that's a good idea if they follow through.
And oftentimes there's a lot of middle cheese, and not, you're not one CEO, but a lot of middle cheese.
But that's where the money is, because there are a lot of these medium and upper managers, and not just, there's a limited number of CEOs, and that won't get you very far. But it's also a question of fairness. And the symbolism should not be underestimated. You do need to have buy-in from the people who are paying $20 for their parking spots at Sick Kids or whatever else, which is too much, by the way. that their money isn't just going to finance the inflated salaries of a CEO who isn't going to be poached tomorrow. So it's also about fairness.
Mm-hmm. So I'm a little concerned, and the symbolism, I will agree with you to a point, Martin, that it does send a message to a degree. But I also think they're doing this for the exact wrong reason. They're trying to come out and let on that they're trying to make a big difference. If they really were, to your point, they've had 11 years in government. Why weren't they already doing these things? Why weren't they in 11 years ago? Chris Mazza would have never gotten $8.3 million or $9.3 million if the government truly was thinking in that mindset, and if they actually put action behind their words. And frankly, I'm getting a little tired of the hollow rhetoric of the 30-second cut line. Where is the detail? Where is this going to happen? Why aren't all agencies? Why are we picking and choosing a few? The LHINs are a prime example. They built the LHINs in to be a modifier so they can be a middle ground, have again paid extremely high salaries to many of the people within the LHINs. And what have we really got for that? You know, we're 1,600 nurses we've lost in the last little while, according to the ONA, and yet those salaries keep going up. The bonus structure keeps going up. You know, we have to quit tweaking around the edges if we're truly going to turn this province around. And again, that ability for the people to pay. Yes, you want to have the best and brightest, but you also have to be able to afford what you can afford.
Let me ask you this. Catherine's thrown out her party's number, which is $418,000. Is there a number that you think should be the cap?
No, we haven't even looked at it, I think, from that perspective. Again, we're looking at a much broader thought process, and it's again why I go back to, we said right off the bat when I first got elected, we campaigned on it. Put everybody across the board until we get our finances back in order, and then you can re-ratchet and take a look at what you can afford at that point. And that is fair. Then everybody's paying their freight, and I get to the PSWs, and there may be groups that we have to look at there, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of public sector people that make very good money in a very comfortable living with all of the benefits and a full pension, and they have to be part of the effort to turn this around. And we couldn't understand why people picked on teachers or picked on firemen or picked on police. We have to go across the board. Anybody getting a provincial paycheck has to be part of the solution.
Well, I hope you feel the same way when we do a full examination of all the private companies that are doing public sector work and are not going to fall under this legislation. You know, we've done an early analysis of the public accounts over the last 5 years. IT services in the public sector have risen by private companies by 63%. So this legislation will not capture any of those high salaries because they don't fall under the sunshine list. And that's a whole other sector, and that's a growing budgetary number, which maybe is higher than the $4 million that Martin referenced earlier.
Let me ask you about this, Martin, and it's about the symbolism. We just got a couple of minutes left. I want to try and get all of you in on this. But is the motivation starting with executives, higher, middle cheese, as you said? Is it a way to send a message to teachers, OPP officers, that when they go to negotiate, province could say to them, hey, listen, we've capped the big guys, the big jobs out there, can't ask for more money?
Well, I think that, I'm not sure that's the primary motive, but I think it's only fair that if you are going to ask everyone to sacrifice, that you make sure that the people at the very top are also doing their fair share. And I think that was one of the blowbacks.
Is that part of the messaging here?
Yeah, it was part of the blowback they got in the last round, where people said, why are you capping us, picking on us, when you've got the other people at the top getting off with little, especially they found bonuses were getting through the freezes, because these freezes have been imposed across the board, not just for teachers, but also for the supervisory non-union staff for a few years now. The problem was that the bonuses were getting through and the salaries were high to begin with. I'm very worried that this legislation may sound good, but they're going to screw it up when they do their comparators with the private sector, because the private sector often pays already inflated amounts of money for certain people, because these boards of directors all pat themselves on the back and give each other big amounts of money. You know, Chris Mazza got his free smoothies because the board of directors.
Very angry about the smoothies, yeah.
Because I had smoothie envy, perhaps, the Dairy Queen thing. But the board of directors approved his packages, so you had all these cozy arrangements that have set a high benchmark. We ought not to necessarily try to transplant that into the public sector, or we will have achieved nothing.
Catherine and Bill, let me just get you in briefly. Is the message, is there a symbolic message in this to the regular folk, the everyday provincial worker, that don't come looking for money here because we're now chopping the salaries or capping the salaries of your bosses?
Well, I mean, there's a huge trust issue. I mean, that has to be put on the table, and I think the job of the opposition parties is to ensure that the Liberals fully understand that. What came before us in this legislation demonstrated that they don't understand it, that they think that they can continue on with a very arrogant and entitled sense of, they're in charge and they know what's best. But really, this legislation, as I pointed out, will not create hard caps. It doesn't do a thorough review of what salaries should be going forward in the public sector, and we continue to have concerns about it.
Bill, give you the last word.
Catherine and I don't always agree, but on this one I think we're bang on. The trust is a concern, and I think, again, symbolism only goes so far. What we really want to see is the action of the government. We should have seen it for the last 11 years. We wouldn't have had an Orange, we wouldn't have had gas plants, we wouldn't have had all of those e-health boondoggles and the wasted dollars that the front line, let's not ever take our eye off the front line who are truly losing out because of this. And this is, again, a sliver. It's a good sliver to start, at least some action, but I want to see the detail. I want to see what they're truly going to do, and I want to see actions in there that they're actually going to stand behind, because as we've said, they continually say one thing and do another. This is one of those ones that, again, I just don't trust at the end of the day that they're truly going to change anything. We just found out $468 million was negotiated behind closed doors with the teachers after telling us that they capped their salaries. So again, a little tough to trust them at the end of the day.
Okay. Good discussion. Thank you to all three of you.
Thank you.
Martin Redcon from the Toronto Star, Catherine Fife from the NDP, Bill Walker.
Thank you.
The PCs, thank you. Get you a smoothie after the show,
Thank you. I'm
Martin.
waiting for it.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.